Can you pretend to be my dad on my graduation day?" Those were the trembling words the poor girl whispered on freezing Eastwood Avenue, her voice shaking as she clutched the rain-soaked notice that threatened to erase 4 years of her struggle, completely unaware. He was a billionaire CEO, whose quiet reaction would shock her, the crowd, and everyone who heard their story. On that brutal morning, she stood there shivering, drenched, ignored by the world, her future hanging by a single $100 she didn't have, her hope fading with every step of the rushing strangers who refused to look at her. But when the sleek black sedan slowed beside her, when the tall man with the tailored suit stepped out untouched by the storm, and when his unreadable eyes landed on her desperation, something shifted in the air like fate rewriting itself right in front of her. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he carried. She didn't know why he paused or why he looked at her as if her broken whisper meant something. But why her? Why now? And why would a billionaire CEO stop for a poor girl begging for help on the coldest day of her life? The wind on Eastwood Avenue didn't move, it slashed. Every gust carved straight through her jacket, slicing at her arms, her ribs, her lungs, as if the weather itself had decided she had already endured too much. Rain didn't fall in gentle lines. It came sideways, violent, rattling against metal railings, store windows, and her thin backpack that clung to her like a damp lifeline. Crowds pushed past her, businessmen shielding themselves with wide umbrellas, students laughing under hoodies, mothers tugging impatient toddlers behind them. No one stopped. No one even glanced. She walked alone, leaning into the storm as if her body weighed nothing at all. Each step splashed into freezing puddles that swallowed the edges of her worn shoes. Her fingers tightened around the single sheet of paper she had folded and unfolded so many times it now looked like it had survived a war rather than a campus office printer. The edges curled. The ink ran from the rain, but the cruel sentence stayed intact. Payment balance required, $100. Diploma hold active, just $100. 100 stupid, impossible, unreachable dollars standing between her and the graduation she had fought for with every hour of her breath these last 4 years. Her jaw clenched as she held the paper to her chest. Her heart thudded painfully, not fast but heavy, like it was dragging something else with it. Shame, maybe. Fear. Loss. She had walked these streets before, soaked, tired, fighting to stay upright. But never like this. Never with the weight of failure pulling at the back of her neck, whispering that her fight had finally broken her. A bus roared past, splashing a wave of dirty street water across her legs. The shock of the cold made her gasp. But even that didn't turn a single head. People kept walking. Their lives kept moving. The world didn't know she was drowning. Her breath came out in a shaky cloud as she looked up at the sky, gray, cracked open, merciless. Her hood slipped backward with another violent gust, letting the rain strike her hair like icy needles. She didn't bother fixing it. Her hands were too numb, and she wasn't sure she cared anymore. 4 years. 4 years of starving on purpose. 4 years of skipping meals and sleeping through hunger pains. 4 years of closing her eyes and whispering to herself that it would all be worth it. 4 years of becoming invisible so she could survive each week, each semester, each exam. Now she was invisible again, but this time in the worst way. She reached the crosswalk on Eastwood Avenue and pressed the pedestrian button with a trembling thumb. The metal was cold enough to burn. She lowered her gaze to the street, watching headlights smear through the rain. Her soaked jeans clung tightly to her legs. Her wet hair stuck to her cheeks. Even her backpack felt heavier than usual, pressing down on her spine. Her throat tightened again as she pulled the paper from her chest and looked at it under the flickering streetlight. The numbers blurred from the droplets. She blinked hard, trying to wipe the page with the sleeve of her jacket, only smearing the ink further. She let out a broken laugh, a quiet, breathless sound that tasted like despair. $100, she whispered to herself. 100 stupid dollars. Cars sped by. Tires hissed. Thunder rumbled somewhere behind the thick clouds. And she just stood there, in the middle of a city full of people. She might as well have been standing on another planet. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Rainwater. Tears. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. Her chest rose and fell quickly now. Too quickly. As the reality began pressing in from all sides. Her mother was gone. Her father was a ghost she never met. And she had no one to call, no one to borrow from, no one left to try. She pushed forward again, moving down the block like her legs were made of sandbags. Every few seconds she looked at the paper, like she was waiting for it to magically change its mind, for the universe to say, "No, no, you've suffered enough." But life didn't work like that. The crowds thinned as she reached the stretch of Eastwood Avenue that curved toward Lark. This part of town was quieter, colder, the wind sharper as it tunneled between tall office buildings. The rain felt even harsher now, striking her skin like tiny slaps. Still, she kept walking, one block after another. Because what else could she do? Her voice remained locked in her chest, a tight ball of fear she couldn't swallow down. She gripped the paper again, squeezing until it crumpled against her palm. She didn't notice the sleek black sedan yet. She didn't notice how it slowed. She didn't see the tinted window lower just a fraction. All she knew was that she had reached the edge of something inside herself that couldn't take another step without breaking. She didn't remember when she first learned to walk quietly, lightly, like someone who didn't want to disturb the world around her. It happened gradually, the way survival habits do. As she trudged down the icy pavement of Eastwood Avenue that morning, every step she took felt like an echo of the life that had shaped her. A life that demanded she move carefully, quietly, and constantly forward, even when the path turned cruel. Rain slid down her face in cold ribbons as she braced herself against a blast of wind, and for a brief moment her mind drifted somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere lit by a dim kitchen bulb and the soft hum of an old refrigerator. She could almost see her mother's hands again, small, thin, and endlessly tired, smelling of laundry detergent and shift-long exhaustion. Her mother never complained, not once, not even when the world had pushed her to the edges of her strength. She wore resilience the way other women wore perfume. "You keep going," she used to whisper, brushing damp hair from her daughter's forehead, "even when it feels like life is trying to stop you. You keep going." Those words lived in her bones now, pushing her forward when everything else tried to freeze her in place. The memory flickered again, this time sharper, more painful. The hospital room, the failing monitors, the trembling hand she squeezed until it went still. That was the night she learned what real silence felt like. Not peaceful, not gentle, but hollow, final. A silence that carried every unspoken future inside it. Her foot caught on a raised crack in the sidewalk, snapping her out of the memory before it swallowed her. She gasped slightly, steadying herself, then kept walking. She always kept walking. After her mother passed, the world didn't pause. Rent was due. Tuition was due. Books weren't free. Nothing was free. And she had only two choices: break or survive. She survived. Every overnight shift at the diner. Every morning cleaning rich students' off-campus apartments. Every weekend washing dishes at the Filipino restaurant where the owner pretended not to notice when she took home leftover rice in tiny foil packets. Every hour spent folding clothes at the department store until her fingers cracked from dryness and cold. She survived the constant hunger stomach growling through lectures, while classmates munched on snacks without even thinking about the privilege. She survived the nights, sleeping with a hoodie as a blanket when the dorm heat malfunctioned, but she couldn't afford to complain. She survived the whispers of other students, those small, casual judgments that scraped at her ribs like sandpaper. She works too many jobs. She smells like bleach. Does she even have a family? She learned to ignore it all, to bury it deep, to focus on the degree she believed could rewrite her future. But even that belief came with sacrifices. She still remembered the night she placed her grandmother's locket, the only piece of her past she had left, into the pawn shop owner's hand. A tiny gold heart, worn from decades of being held, kissed, cherished. She had stared at it for a long moment before letting it go, telling herself it was just an object. But when the man slid 2 bills across the counter, something cracked quietly inside her. She folded the money into her pocket and walked out without looking back. Everything had been leading to graduation day. The one moment she thought would prove she wasn't invisible, that her mother's sacrifices weren't wasted, that her own hunger, her exhaustion, her aching feet, Her trembling nights studying under flickering dorm lights, none of it had been for nothing. And now that moment was slipping from her hands because of a single sheet of paper and a $100 balance she couldn't cover. It felt cruel, unfair, almost personal. As she reached the Eastwood and Lark intersection, her breath came in uneven waves. The wind caught her hair and whipped it across her face. Her shoes squelched with each step, soaked completely through. She wiped a trembling hand across her cheek, unsure if she was removing rainwater or frustration. Maybe both. She stopped under the dull yellow glow of a flickering street lamp, staring down at the crumpled notice again. Her fingers tightened around it so hard the paper almost tore. She had always handled everything alone. Every bill, every disappointment, every loss. She didn't ask for help. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She didn't break open her pain for strangers to see. But now, she was at the edge. A humiliating edge. She lifted her eyes slowly, scanning the street. The bus stop was empty. The sidewalks were thinning of people. Cars were speeding by, headlights blurring behind, rain streaks. Everyone had somewhere to go. Everyone had someone waiting for them. Except her. A sharp ache pressed against her ribs, squeezing until she could barely breathe. This right here was the moment she realized she had nothing left to trade, nothing left to sell, no shifts left to pick up, no miracles left to hope for. Her knees wobbled, and she gripped the cold metal pole beside her, inhaling sharply. She blinked hard, fighting the burn in her eyes. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want to ask a stranger for help. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to feel small or desperate or exposed. But the world didn't care about what she wanted. A sleek black sedan appeared at the far end of the street. She barely noticed it, not yet. She pressed the soggy paper to her chest again and whispered something to herself under the breath she barely had left. I just need help. Just this once. And the rain kept falling. The rain had begun to fall heavier, soaking through her clothes until every inch of fabric clung to her skin like a weight she couldn't shake off. She reached the corner where Eastwood Avenue met Lark, the intersection where the wind sharpened, where the noise of the city dimmed just enough to let her hear the brittle sound of her own breathing. This was where her steps slowed, where the world pressed in too tightly, where the truth of her situation felt like it was clawing up through her chest. Her fingers trembled so violently she almost dropped the notice. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. But the moment she inhaled deeply, a flash of memory struck her so fast, so unexpected, it stole her air. She was 12 again, standing in line at the grocery store behind shelves stacked with food she knew she couldn't afford. Her mother had whispered apologetically as she counted coins, her voice cracking when the total passed what she had. The cashier had looked annoyed. A man behind them had sighed, loudly. And her mother, trying not to break, had placed items aside one by one until the numbers fit inside her nearly empty wallet. She remembered the hot sting of humiliation then, but also the strength with which her mother lifted her chin and smiled as if she hadn't just been judged by a room full of strangers. You don't ever beg, baby, her mother had said later. You work, you endure, you rise. But what happened when you worked and endured and rose and the world still pushed you back down? Her eyes opened slowly. The rain hadn't softened. It had only grown colder. She felt something crumble inside her, something she had kept iron tight for years. She'd reached the breaking point, the moment when pride wasn't a shield but a cage, trapping her inside a suffering no one could see. She looked down the street, hoping for a miracle she didn't believe in. A bus, a friendly face, a familiar voice, anything. But the sidewalk was nearly empty now. And the plaques, few people who hurried by refused to meet her eyes. She wasn't part of their world, just another shadow on a wet street. Her throat tightened painfully. She pressed a hand over her face, trying to catch her breath. The truth hit her with brutal force. She had no choice left. She would have to ask a stranger. She whispered it to herself, hating the sound of it. A stranger. I have to ask a stranger. The words felt foreign in her mouth, stiff, carved from shame. She stepped back, her mind racing. Who? How? What would she even say? No one was going to stop for a wet, exhausted girl begging on a street corner. They would ignore her the same way they ignored everything they didn't understand. The paper slipped from her fingers briefly. She caught it. Barely. Thunder cracked overhead. Her breath hitched. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want to kneel to her circumstances, didn't want to admit to the universe that she needed someone. But her future depended on it. A sleek black sedan gliding quietly down Eastwood Avenue caught her eye only because it didn't speed past like the others. It moved with an intentional stillness, the kind of presence that didn't belong on a storm-beaten street like this. She stared at it as it approached slowly, almost silently, its headlights cutting through sheets of rain with a soft, expensive glow. Something tightened in her gut instinct or fear or hope. She couldn't tell. The sedan glided closer, closer, closer still. Her heart rattled inside her chest. Then it slowed and stopped, right beside her. Her hands froze midair. Her breath stilled. She felt the entire world pause around her, the rain blurring everything except the car and the faint hum of its engine. A tinted window lowered slightly. The sound was subtle, but it sliced through the storm like a signal. A man inside was watching her. Her first instinct was to step back. Her shoes slipped slightly on the wet pavement, her foot nearly twisting. She caught her balance, trembling. The door clicked, opened, and he stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, immensely composed, despite the downpour, a tailored suit that looked untouched by the weather, as if the rain dared not lay a mark on him, his jaw sharp, his expression unreadable, his presence so grounded and self-assured, it made everything around him feel suddenly small. For a heartbeat, she forgot the cold, forgot the rain, forgot the world. He wasn't just well off. He was someone whose life existed in a different universe than hers, where storms didn't reach, where desperation didn't exist, where decisions were made by lifting a finger. Yet here he was, standing in front of her. His eyes, dark and steady, landed on hers with a quiet intensity that made her heart seize. She swallowed hard, her voice trapped behind a wall of fear and humiliation. She wanted to look away but couldn't, not because he was intimidating but because he was seeing her, actually seeing her, not the soaked clothes, or the exhaustion, or the trembling. Her. He glanced at the notice twisted between her fingers, then at her face, and something shifted in his expression just barely, but enough for her chest to tighten. The wind pushed at her from behind, nearly tipping her forward. She gasped and took a shaky step back, but her foot slipped, her arm flailed, her balance faltered. He moved before she even realized she was falling. A hand, steady, warm despite the cold, grabbed her elbow lightly, anchoring her. Her heart hammered. She stared at his hand, then up at him. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer a smile. He simply held her steady until her knees stopped shaking. And then, he let go. Not dismissively, but gently, almost respectfully. Rain pattered against the pavement around them. Cars rushed by in distant hisses. Her breath came fast and uneven. She had no choice left. None. Her voice scraped up, painfully from her throat as she forced herself to face him fully. This was it. This was the moment everything in her life had been building toward, every sacrifice, every hunger pang, every lonely night, every shift that blurred into another. She inhaled, trembling violently. She had to speak, but her voice refused to come out. Not yet. Not until she could look him in the eye and accept the unbearable truth. If she didn't ask this stranger for help, she would not graduate. Her lips parted, but the words tangled and collapsed in her throat. The shame of what she needed to ask felt too large to push past. Rain dripped from her eyelashes as she stared at him, this impossibly composed man standing in the storm as if nothing in the world could touch him. His tailored suit remained crisp. His expression remained unreadable. His shoes gleamed beneath the streetlight, untouched by the mud and water soaking her own. Her heart pounded. Her breath stuttered. She tried again. I. But the wind swallowed everything she whispered. His gaze didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. It stayed steady, watchful, almost curious, as if he was waiting for something she hadn't yet shown him. She forced air into her lungs, clutching the wrinkled notice with both hands until the edges cut lightly into her palms. Tears mixed with rain, streaming down her face in small, trembling rivers. Her voice cracked on its way out. carrying the weight of every sacrifice she had made. "I need help," she whispered. He didn't move. She inhaled again, trembling harder now, and raised the soggy paper toward him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was taller up close, commanding in a way that made the space around them shift. It's my graduation," she managed. "They won't give me my diploma unless I pay this. It's only $100, but—" Her voice broke completely, splintering under the truth. "But I don't have it, and I don't have anyone else to ask." Something flickered across his features, fleeting, almost invisible, but undeniably real. A crack in the marble exterior. She swallowed, wiping her cheek with the back of her freezing hand. "I've tried everything. Every shift. Every extra job. I sold my grandmother's locket. I've done everything." Her breath hitched as she whispered the words she had been terrified to say aloud. "Please, can you pretend to be my dad tomorrow? At my graduation, just so they'll let me walk? I know it sounds insane. I know I shouldn't be asking this, but I'm out of options. I can't lose this moment, not after everything." The words collapsed between them, fragile and soaked by rain. She lowered her head, expecting him to walk away, to laugh, to shake his head and get back into his car, to judge her, to call her crazy, to do what everyone else always did, ignore her. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then he stepped closer. Her breath caught as he took the paper from her trembling hand. He read it slowly, carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the worn edges, the smudged ink, the desperate truth sitting in his palm. Rain dotted the page. He didn't seem to care. When he finally looked up, something new burned behind his gaze, a sharp, private intensity, as if reading that paper had triggered something old, something buried, something painful or unfinished inside him. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Her heart stuttered. She didn't have a prepared answer. No rehearsed speech, no strategy. The truth spilled out on its own. "Because," she swallowed hard, "because everyone else walked past me." His jaw tightened, not with anger, something deeper. "And you didn't," she added softly. "You stopped. No one stops." The rain fell harder now, drumming against the pavement, cascading off the brim of the streetlight above them. She stood shaking, vulnerable in a way she hated, feeling like every raw piece of her was exposed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he crouched slightly, not to pick something up, not to inspect the ground, but to unlace his polished shoes. She blinked, confused. He removed them slowly, then stepped out of them entirely, standing barefoot on the cold, wet pavement. It was such a shocking contrast that her breath froze. The billionaire she didn't know was a billionaire. The man with power written in every angle of his posture stood barefoot in the storm like it meant nothing. He lifted the shoes and pressed them gently into her hands. Her mouth parted, stunned. What are you doing?" "Wear these," he said quietly. She looked down at the shoes, expensive, shining even through the rain, impossibly out of place in her trembling, chilled hands, and confusion surged through her. I don't understand," she whispered. He straightened, rain sliding off his hair, leaving droplets glistening along his jawline. His face remained composed, but there was something different in his eyes now, something she couldn't name. "You will," he replied. "Tomorrow." Then he stepped back, barefoot, in a puddle that splashed around his ankles, and the door of the sedan opened as if it had been waiting for the moment he decided. "Wait," she started, taking a step forward, overwhelmed by panic, confusion, and disbelief. But he was already inside. The sedan pulled away smoothly, tires slicing through the rainwater as if the storm itself parted for the car. She watched in disbelief, her breath fogging the air in short, stunned bursts. She stood there, shoes held against her chest, staring after the disappearing taillights. Barefoot. He left barefoot. For her, the cold cut sharply through her as she stood frozen on the sidewalk, the weight of the shoes settling into her trembling grip. They felt symbolic, heavy, important. like she'd just been handed something she didn't yet understand, something she wasn't sure she deserved. The storm roared around her, but inside her a strange, confusing warmth flickered for the first time that day. She didn't sleep that night, not really. Her body lay on the thin mattress in her dorm room, but her mind remained on Eastwood Avenue, replaying every second beneath that violent storm. The way he stepped out of the sleek sedan, the way he looked at her as if she wasn't just another girl swallowed by a city that didn't care. The way he read the notice with that subtle tightening of his jaw, controlled, quiet, but powerful. And then his shoes. Those shoes. They sat at the foot of her bed now, perfectly aligned, despite how she'd carried them home, clutched tightly against her chest so they wouldn't fall into puddles or disappear as if they'd been a hallucination the storm created. Her small dorm room was silent except for the hum of the old radiator that puffed weak, uneven warmth. The single lamp glowed softly on the desk piled with textbooks she no longer needed. Her graduation gown hung crookedly on the closet door. She watched the shoes through the dim light, as if they might vanish if she blinked too long. She sat up slowly, pulling her knees to her chest. A blanket draped around her shoulders was damp from where her hair still refused to dry. She'd showered twice trying to wash the cold off her skin. But it wasn't just the cold that clung to her. It was confusion, awe, fear, something that felt dangerously like hope. Barefoot. He left barefoot. A man like him, someone who lived in a world insulated from harsh weather, from scarcity, from humiliation, had walked into rain-soaked pavement barefoot, so she could walk away with something he gave freely and intentionally. Why? Who does that? What kind of man gives a stranger his shoes and leaves without explanation? Her mind tugged at the moment he asked, "Why me?" His voice wasn't judgmental. It had been sincere, and when she told him the truth that he didn't walk past her, his eyes had changed, darkening with something emotional he didn't want her to see. She hugged the blanket closer. Maybe he had once needed help and no one stopped for him. Maybe he recognized the desperation in her eyes because he'd carried it once. Maybe the storm reminded him of a night he'd never forgotten. She didn't know, but something about the way he looked at her made it clear he carried ghosts too. The shoes felt heavier with every passing minute, not because they weighed much, but because they meant something she didn't understand yet. She stretched her legs out and nudged one shoe with her toe. Its polished surface reflected the warm yellow of her lamp. She could smell the faint scent of expensive leather. These weren't just shoes, they were a message, a promise, a thread pulling her toward something she wasn't yet meant to know. Her chest tightened with a mix of dread and hope. Tomorrow. He had said tomorrow. What would happen tomorrow? Would he really show up? Would he really pretend to be her father? Was he a kind stranger, or someone far more complicated? Was she a fool to believe any of this? Her head dropped forward into her hands, and she let out a long, shaky breath. The truth sat heavily in her chest. She had nothing to lose. Nothing but the only dream she'd sacrificed years for. The shoes waited. At some point, exhaustion forced her into a restless sleep filled with half-dreams. His silhouette in the rain, his steady voice, his bare feet hitting the pavement, the way the storm seemed to bend around him rather than touch him. When dawn crept into her room, faint and gray, she opened her eyes as if waking from a nightmare and a miracle at the same time. For a moment she didn't know if any of it had been real. She blinked rapidly, breath shallow. Then she saw them. The shoes. Real. Solid. Shining faintly in the morning light. She sat up abruptly, heart racing. Her hands trembled as she touched them, tracing the edges, the stitching, the dried rainwater on their surface. This happened. He happened. And she couldn't run from the reality waiting for her. She dressed slowly, wearing her cleanest jeans and the only blouse she owned that didn't have a faint bleach stain. Her fingers shook as she lifted her graduation gown from the closet door and slipped it carefully over the hanger she would carry later. Then her hands hovered over the shoes. What if they didn't fit? What if wearing them was a mistake? What if she misunderstood everything? But another voice, small, trembling, hopeful, whispered that maybe he meant for her to wear them not because they were expensive, but because they anchored her to something bigger than the moment. She slid her feet inside. They were loose, but warm, comfortable, unexpectedly comforting. like a shield she'd never had before. Then she stepped outside. The sky was clear now, washed pale blue after the storm. A crisp breeze grazed her face. She clutched her graduation gown tightly and walked toward the bus stop, feeling the weight of the borrowed shoes with every step. She felt like she was stepping into a story she didn't fully understand yet, but one she couldn't turn away from. On the bus, surrounded by confident students wearing bright smiles and families chattering excitedly, she pressed her feet firmly into the shoes. Every time the nerves rose, she touched the polished leather lightly with her fingertips. Slowly, fear didn't vanish, but it quieted, because tomorrow wasn't a question anymore. He would be there, waiting, watching, and she had no idea the truth he planned to reveal would not only change her graduation day, it would change her entire life. The bus rattled through Eastwood, its worn metal frame humming beneath her seat as she tightened her grip on the edge of her graduation gown. Sunlight poured through the windows, bright, almost too bright after yesterday's storm, casting warm streaks on her hands. She should have felt relieved, grateful, excited even. This was supposed to be her day, the day she'd dreamt about during late-night shifts and aching mornings, but her heart beat too fast, out of rhythm, like it couldn't decide whether to hope or to brace. Students around her talked loudly, their voices filled with easy confidence, laughter, plans for photos, dinner reservations with their families. She sat still, pressed against the window, watching the city pass in blurred shapes and colors. A mother boarded with a bouquet of flowers for her daughter, the petals brushing her shoulder lightly as she squeezed by. The scent drifted over her, sweet, bright, and it tightened something deep inside her chest. Everyone had someone, except her. She looked down at the shoes on her feet. His shoes. They were polished even now, catching glints of sunlight every time the bus jolted. They didn't belong on her feet. They didn't belong in her life. But she couldn't take them off. She needed them more than she understood. Every step she took in them this morning felt like a promise she didn't dare speak aloud. The bus lurched to a stop near campus. Students poured out in excited waves, phones already raised for photos. She stepped off last, holding her gown close, the shoes making soft taps on the pavement. The campus sprawled out in front of her. Tall brick buildings, trimmed hedges, banners with School of Arts and Sciences fluttering in the mild wind. She walked toward the quad slowly, unsure if the shaky breath in her chest came from nerves or from everything the last 24 hours had done to her. When she reached the quad, someone called her name. She turned. Her professor, the one who had slipped her extra study materials when she couldn't afford the textbook, the one who asked if she was eating enough without making her feel ashamed, walked toward her with a gentle smile. His gray hair fluttered slightly in the breeze, and he looked almost proud, like a hawk guarding its smallest hatchling. "There you are," he said warmly. "You made it." For a moment she almost broke. Tears burned behind her eyes, threatening to spill. She nodded instead. "Barely," she whispered. He studied her face, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the exhaustion she couldn't hide even behind the glow of the morning sun. But he didn't ask invasive questions. He never had. "You earned today," he said softly. "Every inch of it. Don't let anything take that from you." Her throat tightened. All she managed was a quiet, "Thank you." "Come," he said, gesturing toward the gathering crowd. "You should check in before the line gets long." She nodded and walked beside him, the shoes grounding her with each step. For a moment, just a moment, she felt like she belonged here, like she wasn't an outsider slipping through cracks, like she had carved her place into this campus through sheer will. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved to exist in the sunlight too. Inside the auditorium, students lined up in rows of caps and gowns. The air buzzed with anticipation, whispers, camera shutters, the rustling of fabric. She found her seat in the third row. The stage was decorated with soft white lights, tall banners, and a podium draped in the school's crest. She inhaled slowly, clutching the fabric of her gown, the shoes warm against her toes. Then she looked up at the audience, and everything inside her froze. There he was, sitting in the section reserved for distinguished guests, front row, center, where donors and trustees and high-profile executives sat. He didn't look out of place. He looked like he belonged there more than anyone else. But what stole her breath wasn't the tailored charcoal, suit, or the calm authority in his posture. It was his eyes, watching her, directly, as if he'd been waiting for her to lift her head the entire time. She stiffened, her breath caught somewhere high in her chest, trapped painfully between her ribs. For a moment she wondered if she was hallucinating, if her exhaustion had finally tipped into delusion. But no, he was real, solid, present. His gaze didn't break. He gave her a barely there nod, subtle, steady, almost grounding. It felt like the room narrowed around her, like every sound faded except the soft thump of her own heartbeat. He wasn't just a man passing through her storm anymore. He was something else, something dangerous, something life-changing. Why was he here? Why wasn't he hiding behind tinted windows now? Why was he sitting among people who held authority over the school itself? What kind of man moved like this, quietly, invisibly, yet with the weight of an entire world behind him? A hand tapped her shoulder from the student behind her, snapping her out of her trance. The ceremony was beginning. Music swelled through the speakers, bright, swelling orchestral chords, and students adjusted their gowns, fixing hats and smoothing tassels. She sat straight, heart pounding. The dean walked to the podium. The microphone crackled, but her eyes drifted back to him. He hadn't moved. He hadn't looked away. He sat as if nothing in this room surprised him, as if he had known exactly how this morning would unfold. The sunlight filtering through the tall side windows glinted faintly across his jawline. His hands rested calmly on his knees. But beneath that calm exterior, she sensed something else: anticipation. Maybe, or intention. She exhaled slowly, the tremble in her chest rising again. The shoes warmed her feet, anchoring her in place. Whatever he planned to reveal after this ceremony, whatever truth he carried, it was coming. And she wasn't ready.